Now, Professor Lee gave you, I think, a very good overview of the MOOC phenomenon, and I'm going to describe my personal experiences. I'm not here representing anyone. I have been both a student and an instructor for Coursera, and the course that I taught recently ran its first full term. It ended on the last day of May, I believe. So I'm just going to say something about the phenomenon at large, give you some insight as to perspectives in the United States, among the higher education establishment in the United States, as to where this is going, and then just show some examples from my own course to see how the material is accessed, what sort of features are involved, and I'll make some other comments. May I ask how many here have taken a course offered either? So I'm going to be talking about Coursera because that is the vehicle with which I actually have some experience. But I think many of the things that I say are also applicable to edX and Udacity and some of the others. How many here have taken a course from one of these people? Okay, very good. And how many have completed such a course? That brings me to one of my first points. Well, Professor Lee showed this theoretical curve. I guess I can't really draw here, but the hype phase and the disillusionment, and then whatever follows after that. And certainly there is no shortage of hype. Here's a very influential columnist, Thomas Friedman. He writes about big developments for the New York Times, and he says he is one of the proponents, you might say, who says that this phenomenon will change the world as we know it. Now, Thomas Friedman, as far as I can tell, never writes about anything that he thinks is not going to change the world as we know it, but he has lots of choices for what he thinks is going to change the world. There's also a backlash. So if you just Google the acronym MOOC and look at the American the results that are returned from the American press, you'll see sort of a bimodal distribution of opinion. There's some people think it's going to change the world, like Mr. Friedman. Others say there's nothing new about it. It's just the same as reading a book. It doesn't really offer anything beyond what one can get from self-study. And then there's another element which is emerging, which sees this evolution as something actually quite sinister in terms of a strategy by university administration to get rid of as many faculty as they can and replace them with speaking robots. I should say, the American, I think there are 25 million students enrolled as undergraduates in the American system of higher education. A lot of money is spent on university education. I think you're aware of the fees that are charged. The cost of attending a select university like Harvard or MIT approaches $300,000 a year, $300,000 for the full term of an undergraduate degree. And the student loan debt is becoming a significant issue in American society. Within the past year, the outstanding balance of loans taken out by students to pay for their education, the net outstanding balance became larger than the net outstanding balance on consumer credit card debt. Now, those of you who have been to America know that we spend like crazy on credit cards. So credit card debt, so student loan debt now exceeds automobile loan debt in the United States. This is, so it's, and that there's, the number isn't that large. It's still much smaller than mortgage, home mortgage loans, but its effect is focused on young people that are having to pay back loans at a time when they might be saving to get married or get a household or something. So there's a lot of the dialogue about the implications of MOOCs in the United States is tied up with other factors that are not necessarily applicable to other societies. So I'm going to review the basic features of the Coursera approach, which I think are common to the other MOOC modalities that Professor Lee mentioned. So so I'll say one thing. There's nothing new about offering education online, or let's say online education is, in my view, sort of a natural evolution of what started in the 1830s when the first correspondence school opened up and used the British postal system to make education possible sort of nationwide at low cost with no direct engagement between a student and a lecturer. But this new trend involves a sort of scalability that I think is without parallel. So the enrollment in these courses, I think my laser pointer has, enrollment in these courses is free to anyone, and moreover, it requires no surrender of any personal information, at least at this time, to the course provider. So apart from giving an email address and establishing a password, you're giving nothing away to the hosting entity. It makes possible, people believe, an arbitrarily large enrollment. The largest numbers that I've heard of are of the order of 200,000 students. This would be in Andrew Ng's course on machine learning, very popular course, which deals with a subject which is the academic specialty most valued by Google, Facebook, and Twitter in recruiting their next generation of engineers. So someone who does well in Andrew Ng's course has given themselves, will have given themselves some skills that are very much in demand in Silicon Valley these days. Now, the real number that needs to be looked at, though, in my opinion, is what percentage of the enrollment of the enrollees actually complete the course. I'm going to say much more about that in a moment, but I think you might conjecture that given the minimal level of obligation that you incur by enrolling in a course, it stands to reason many more people are going to just give it up than would be the case if they were paying fees and enrolled in a university where there's sort of an academic record and there's, in many cases, a bit of a stigma associated with failure and with dropping a course. So if a conventional university like National Chiao Tung University failed to complete degrees for 95% of its students, the entire management and faculty would be dismissed without notice. For the MOOCs, well, I'll make a case that this number isn't, well, I'll say more about this later. We'll come to that later. Coursera signs contracts with universities. So the courses that it offers are offered within a legal framework of a business contract signed by Coursera and a representative of a university. The universities are required by that contract to offer courses that are consistent with their own academic standards. And this is part of the appeal of the Coursera brand, in that it is hosting courses that are taught by faculty at places like Stanford, Princeton, University of Pennsylvania, the University of Maryland, a number of others, very highly reputable universities. And so the students who take those courses are in principle getting something rather equivalent something comparable to the level of instruction that they would get at the sponsoring university. So this means, for example, if you wanted to be an engineer at Google or Facebook or Twitter or any number of these other, say social media startups, just to take a simple example, these are, the engineering work there is in the field of computer science, applied computer science. If you wanted to do that, the best way you could get an interview at one of those companies is to have a PhD in computer science from MIT or Stanford or Berkeley. That won't get you a job, but at least it will show that you've been in the milieu that trains, sort of the best people that come out in the field of computer science each year. So if you wanted to do that and you lived in Africa and had no realistic possibility of ever being enrolled in such a course, you could take Andrew Ng's course, and you would then learn whether you had you would get a good idea whether you have the ability, whether you have the academic and what do you call it, spiritual ability to complete a course at Stanford University or MIT or one of those other places. You might decide that you just don't have that ability, and so you should do something else. You might decide that you know everything that you need to know very well. You're then in a position to make some more progress by getting yourself inspired to apply for scholarships or something. Or you may, in probably most cases, identify those areas in which you need better training and help bring yourself up to a level where you could be competitive. To me, that is, I think that really is the driving philosophy that's articulated by the CEOs of Coursera, Daphne Koller and Andrew Ng. At least I've heard them say that. It's a way of, of making possible high-level exposure. It doesn't make it possible for anyone to become a genius or become an expert in any subject, but it makes it possible for everyone to get exposure to some of the best academic instruction that's offered in the world. Now, here are some more, you might say they're logistical details, but they have implications for in my opinion, for the effectiveness of the approach. So the courses are all held during specific time windows that range from about 4 to 10 weeks. In other words, when a course is announced, it's announced that it will start on a fixed date and that it will last for so and so many weeks. The day is usually a Monday. It's usually the last Monday of a month for Coursera. Now, in my opinion, why this is important is as follows. So together with a collaborator, Victor Golitsky, I designed and conducted an online course in quantum physics. Now, that consisted of lectures, some lecture notes, in-lecture quizzes, homework, and a final exam. We could have simply put that all on a website and said anyone who wants to learn quantum physics as we see it can read this stuff, can do the homework, can take the exam, and don't bother us. Or that's like writing a textbook, which is actually a very valuable thing. You write a textbook. Your goal in writing a textbook, I would assume, is to provide a vehicle so that people can learn something and take the benefit of your perspective on the subject. So it's a very valuable thing to do. But or you could record lectures and post them on YouTube. That's something, or iTunes. That's something that's been done for some time. But what happens in those cases is that the people who elect to view your lecture on YouTube are basically doing so in isolation. They can learn much from it. They can learn as much from it as they could if they were in a class. But in a class, you are working with lots of other people on the same material all at the same time. And as I will mention below, there is a lot of communication between the students. So it's just like, for the same reason that universities hold courses at regularly scheduled times, it creates a community of learning in a certain subject that's far more effective, far more motivating, at least in my opinion, than isolated self-study. And it does create a community, as we will see. The advice given to lecturers is that, by Coursera, is lectures should be delivered in segments of 10 to 20 minutes. They can be viewed at any time. So when I say the courses are held during specific time windows, there's a lot of latitude within that window as to when you will look at a lecture or when you will do a homework. There's always some sort of like soft and hard deadline for the return of the assignments that's fixed. But as far as engagement with the course materials, that's done at one's convenience. And apparently, there are many more people who will watch 6 10-minute lectures at their convenience than will watch a 1-hour lecture which lasts an hour long. So the amount of time is the same, but in designing lectures that are this short, it forces some discipline on the instructors to have a story with a beginning and end and some testing of what's acquired during that brief period. I'll show an example when we get to the interactive part. One common feature, the in-lecture quizzes, where the lecturer will pose a question to whoever's viewing it and stop, and then it's up to the student to answer the question. Usually you have to give a correct answer to the question before the video will proceed. And this is this is a technique that's often used in regular classrooms. Someone who's lecturing about quantum mechanics for half an hour and then stops and asks the class a question. So I heard a very amusing statement of the effectiveness of asking, and this is true in my experience as well, amusing anecdote told by Andrew Ng about what happens when he gives a lecture to 200 students in his ordinary machine learning class at Stanford University, and then asks them a question. They say, like, well, tell me what this line of code accomplishes. So he says, half of the students in the class are corresponding with their friends on Facebook. 30% have been taking notes. They didn't even hear the question, so they can't answer it because they've been taking notes. 10% are just people who are naturally inhibited or shy, and at least they're gonna pause and think. And then there's a couple of smart kids that always answer the question. So the practical effect of this in-lecture question, the practical effect for most people, at least in a large class, a class of, let's say, more than 100 students, the practical effect is zero. I mean, unless you're one of the, unless you're among the people who was going there specifically to bring attention to yourself by answering questions, the fact that you're dealing with a human lecturer actually may not have that great a practical importance compared to an interactive online experience where we'll see some results. I'll show you a brief testimonial about that later. I don't want to drag on right now. There's no vehicle for individual contact between the 200,000 students and the poor instructor. So of course, most of these people, one can figure out who they are from the Google and send them email. The practice that I did get email from some of the students in my course, and I gave them a uniform response, which is said, please post this question in the student forums, and if it's, I may answer it there, or at least, someone will answer it there. The homework and the exams are graded by, I say a machine, it's graded by an algorithm. There are other examples which are used with good effectiveness, according to some reports, in the humanities. This is called peer grading. I will not talk about that today because I haven't used it myself, but just give a very simple description, it means for a given assignment, about 20% of the students, 80% of the students chosen at random are given an assignment to write an essay of 500 words or something. Then the other 20% are given the assignment of grading the essays written by others, following a certain set of guidelines. And according to reports, sometimes this works reasonably well, and the system is able to identify good graders versus bad graders. That is a technique for preserving the scalability. So I mean, if you have a system like that, that doesn't seem to put any upper limit on the number of students. Whereas if you just have everything is being done by teaching assistants, then something like the gross domestic product of the world limits the number of classes that can be offered if there has to be extensive human engagement. Social interaction mediated by student forums. I think this is one of there's nothing novel about this either, but the forums, actually there's a place within the course architecture for people to create their own forums. So all these forums that we're going to see have been generated spontaneously by individuals. But again, that's within this community of people who are taking the course. So a lot of the questions that people have about the homework get answered within the context of the forums, and there's a rule that's articulated. Say you're not supposed to. It's sort of an honor code. You're not supposed to post the answers to any of the homework on the forum, but you can certainly offer advice on the principle that's used or where to look in the lecture to figure out or the supplementary material. So advice that falls short of just saying the answer is 33.2. And in many cases, I've looked at, there's been really very active, intelligent, engaged instruction. And then on a complete, usually one gets a certificate of accomplishment upon satisfactory completion of the course. Now, the objective value of this certificate, its cash exchange value, I think is close to zero. For reasons, so how do I know that? Well, I don't know it for sure, but I did use eBay to try to find people who were willing to well, in these massive online games, as you know, in your sister nation across the straits here, there are vast factories where the workers go into work in the morning, they play World of Warcraft all day, they win these magic swords or coins or tokens or whatever, then they're handed over to the management of the factory, which then sells them on eBay. So there's very active secondary market for virtual world credentials that have transactional value. I mean, there's a big industry that's grown up to serve that market. No such industry has emerged yet in my attempts to contact operatives with offers to pay for a Coursera certificate. Because, you see, as you can see, because of this criterion here, at the moment, anyone who takes this course, I mean, it's like on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. It could be a dog or a cat, right, with a human assisting it in answering the questions. There's no authentication, there's no information beyond the email address, which could be anything. I use my own Gmail address for participation in these courses, and that I could be living anywhere in the world. So the real value here, I think, is a moral value. That is, it's at least I've gotten some of these certificates, and they're proof to me that I mastered something that I didn't know previously. In the fullness of time, as Professor Lee pointed out, this evolution of the massive, the evolution of the massive online courses can be traced back to the early part of the first decade of the 21st century, but its development as a business is only a little bit more than it's about 2 years old. hardly even 2 years old. And so there will be some developments where I expect there'll be some developments with some form of credentialing will be of value, but it'll depend upon this solution of this authentication problem. Okay, so here's I'm going to conclude by just running through a few features of my own course. Simply, it's the only one I've ever made, so I know something about it. It was offered. Let's see. Does it say when it started here? Oh, it started on March 25th. It ran for 8 weeks. The deadline for the final exam was Monday, May 30. Well, let's see. Maybe it was this past Monday. Maybe it was a week ago. I think about a week ago. We had something like 29,000 students enroll, and I say from over 100 countries. That was just based on a voluntary survey that we gave at the start. So if you wish, it's not required, but if you wish, you can fill out the following questionnaire. It had something like 5 questions. It asked about age, employment status, and then residence of country. And here are the self-declared answers. I downloaded the first 3,500 responses. Some people, instead of just saying, what country are you from, instead of saying Trinidad and Tobago, they would give me an essay about their life. Well, I was born in India, but then I worked in Russia. It wasn't exactly, it was a free-formatted field, and it was a pain to actually sort the data out. But here it is. I'm sorry for the small print, but the principal, the largest group, this is the number of students, by rank order. The largest number came from the United States, not surprisingly, about 800. And then the next, India, UK. So these are, English. In UK, they speak a variant of American called English. These are sort of, countries in which English language command is pretty good. But then, Spain, Russia, Brazil, and here, here's this towering colossus, China, rather far down on the list. Now, I don't know why that is. It has, twice as many people as any other country. But it could be a simple matter of the internet access, or it could be language skills, I don't know. And then for your information, here is Taiwan. So of these 3,500 students, there were, what is this number? I don't know, is that like 8 or something? One of them was Professor C.S. Liu, who is, I think, a very important, distinguished figure at this university, or the university system of Taiwan. He told me he was taking it anyway. I don't know whether he got a certificate of completion. I haven't, and I'm not going to say anything about that. I haven't actually looked up the completion rate yet. So, in fact, literally, I can't tell you now how many people have completed the course. I've sort of been traveling for the past couple of weeks and not been that actively engaged. But in the late stages of the course, about 1,500 people were they were viewing the lectures and completing the assignments. So here's this number, 29,000. What happened to the rest of them? The fate seems to be similar for all these courses. So someone takes 0 effort beyond typing your email address to enroll in one of these courses. So lots of people think, it'd be really cool to learn something about quantum mechanics. Then, so they do that months ahead of the time. Then when the course time rolls around, they've got some other interest, or for whatever reason, about half the people who enroll never show up at all. And this is the case, I've heard that this number is common. Then of the other half, about half of them maybe view part of the first lecture and then leave, never to return. So there's a kind of a geometrical progression. I don't know if it's a loss by a factor 2. And I think that the geometrical progression tends to stop about midway to the course, because there you've got the real 5%. These are the people who have, I'll call it the spiritual motivation. I mean, no one is requiring you to take this course. Why would you want to do it? Why wouldn't you rather play World of Warcraft or engage in extreme sports or do it, whatever, the many other things that people like to do with their spare time? So by midway, it's the dedicated people that they're sort of invested in the material. They have a possibility of actually completing something and getting a certificate. So that's this attrition tends to flatten out. And at the end, you're left with people who, I mean, basically in a regular course, like in the American university system, if you want to be a doctor, which is a high-paid job, you have to take a lot of courses like, I don't know what, biology, you have to take physics, but you're basically there under duress. You're in the physics course not because you have any love for the subject, but it's necessary that you pass it in order to get into medical school. So the evaluations of courses like that span a spectrum. There's a lot of people who say this is a lousy course, the instructor should never be allowed to teach it again. I mean, you can go to this Rate My Professors page and read these things about your people you know in America, academics in the United States. The comments at the end of our course were overwhelmingly positive, but you see it's by, you know, all the people who were unhappy went away long ago, and they have other things that are more important to complain about. Okay, so let's. I'll just conclude by going into. Let's see. I meant to do something here. Yes, go to the course page. So, one of the advantages. The other thing, the casual enrollment. So I think I emphasized my belief that casual enrollment is actually not a bad thing. It does give people the chance for exposure, and so if they decide they don't have the time to do the work in the interval during which it has to be done, that's okay. They can just they don't have to participate. They go away. They're not occupying a seat like there's another problem in the American university system with these mandatory courses that people have to take. If you have people that are failing the course, they typically do so, you know, at some stage. Then they've been occupying a seat which ought to have been given to someone who is more motivated and capable of doing the work. So this easy dropout rate is a good thing to have online because it gives people the ability to sample things. Anyway, let's go look. So the things that are offered are lectures, which can be, they're grouped. So here it says week 1, lecture 1. Well, the lecture 1, this is given by my colleague Victor Galitsky, as you can see, is in about 5 parts between 8 and 15 minutes, and the same is true throughout. So basically, there's about 2 hours of lecturing a week, but done in this rather dense format. And I have one of these lectures open. So let's see. Let's go back to the beginning. So this is the first lecture given by my colleague Victor Galitsky. Now I'm missing the sound. Oh, maybe it's because this is on mute for some reason. And I will also tell you a little bit about a fascinating history of the subject. But before going to this main part, so, I'd like to talk about the process of... It's not exactly Hollywood. I mean, what you're going to see is... that's how we keep our costs down. The way we ran it, and this is common for many things, is that you'll see the lecture for a while, but then the lecture goes away, and what you're exposed to is a different aspect of live animation. Let me just move forward here. The Newtonian gravity, and along the horizontal axis, so if there are any physicists here, this is kind of a nice slide. It displays the relationship of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics. The classical mechanics, sort of the basic theory of physics that you learn as an undergraduate. It's very useful. And then there are things like the theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, and then the theory of general relativity that involve big departures from this classical framework. And this is Victor explaining how these things relate to each other. So there are three parameters that are not really used in classical mechanics: the speed of light, Planck's constant, and the Newton's gravitational constant. So the type of animation that occurs in most of these lectures just consists of this type of action of having a whiteboard and then animating the drawings to keep a connection of the lecture with the subject. This is about as exciting as it gets.
Combining it with gravity results in general relativity, another celebrated.
Okay, so now this yellow line indicates the location of an in-video quiz. So let's see what that involves. This is fairly typical.
So the problem is not really with the quantum physics itself, but with our centristic position on how we want to understand.
Okay, so the lecture stops and this quiz pops up. Are there any physicists in the audience other than myself? Professor Lee, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you asked me to stand up on the stage. So here's the what parameter change takes you from non-relativistic quantum mechanics to classical mechanics, the classical limit of quantum mechanics. C is the speed of light. C goes to 0. This is like you check which of these applies. C goes to 0. Speed of light goes to 0. Planck's constant goes to infinity. The gravitation constant goes to infinity, and h bar goes to 0. Now, just in the off chance that you'd received an important telephone call when this was being covered in the class, you can go back. You can go back and look at the lecture again. So I think this is the intersection of h bar. H bar is equal to 0, C is equal to infinity, and G is equal to 0. Oh, okay, we're back. So does anyone feeling lucky? You see, this is the thing. You don't. It's a natural human attribute. Uncertain. There's no point. There's no. You're not going to get ahead in life by answering a question that I pose to you on this stage. What do you think, Professor Lee?
I choose the first one. C goes to 0.
C goes to 0. Okay. Thank you for choosing that. I mean, we can just keep going down the list. I mean, there's a systematic way of doing this, right? There's a systematic way of doing this. I'm going to do it systematically. It's called incorrect. C, correct answer above. Okay, after the first three incorrects, it says H bar goes to 0. So you're not graded on any of this. It's just a way of seeing whether you're following. And then that takes you back to
we can't really readily
back to the lecture. Okay, so other things, additional materials. We have some things about the mathematical preparation that's necessary, and then copies of original literature. I'll just take time to mention an anecdote. So here's a short essay on the photoelectric effect. This is the effect for which Einstein was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. He received the Nobel Prize in Physics, oh golly, when was it? I think it was in like 19... I can't tell you the year, but it was for, let's see, no, I think I must say when it was here. I think it was in the late teens of the early 20th century. 1921. Okay, very good. It was for explaining the photoelectric effect, which was done in a famous paper published in the year 1905. And so this supplementary material contains Einstein's original paper, and which is in German. Oops, sorry. which is in German. And then that little essay that you saw also contained a link to an open, so, oh, by the way, this paper is is in the public domain in the United States of America because it was published before 1923. So this paper was offered by me under the, because it's not subject to copyright. I think it may still be subject to copyright in some countries, but I don't really care about that. But you do have to be very, as an instructor, you must be very, very careful. So I always use either open source material or things with the things that were not copyright or following the Creative Commons or some of these other sort of open licensing agreements. And in some cases, actually requesting permission of copyright holders. The American Physical Society actually was very generous and gave me sort of an open license to use their copyright papers from the Physical Review and Physical Review letters, provided the access was restricted to the students who were taking this course. 3 minutes left. So in one of my homework questions, just asked the student to, so Einstein actually deals with 3 topics in this paper. One is the photoelectric effect. When light hits a metal, it causes the emission of electrons from the metal, and the energy of those electrons turns out to be dependent upon the wavelength of the light. The other is something called Stokes' rule, is relevant to Raman scattering. And the third is the ionization of gases by ultraviolet light. And 2 of those 3 experiments were done by a man named Lenard. So somewhere in this paper, Einstein quotes the result that Lenard gave for the long wavelength limit of light that would ionize air, ordinary air in the room. So one of my homework questions was, what value in nanometers did Einstein attribute to Lenard's measurement of the longest wavelength, the largest wavelength that could ionize air? There's only one way to answer that question correctly. And I said it's in Einstein's paper. You have to go read Einstein's paper, or just read that part. So thereby, you see, I was requiring the students to read something originally written by Albert Einstein rather than by some other interpreter. How many of you have read Einstein's own words? I mean, of course, in translation. You see, believe me, it's worthwhile. There's some reason why they say he was a genius. It shines through. If you had taken my course, you would know what I'm talking about. Well, after, now I'm not like some great scholar, but I can read enough German to figure out what Einstein's talking about most of the time. So I'd gotten the idea for that question from reading that part of the paper. I was actually interested in this technical subject of the ionization of gases by light. So after posing the question, but before posting it online, I thought, maybe I better go check the Wikimedia English translation to see what it says, because I hadn't looked at it yet. When I did, that Wikimedia translation, it had been corrupted. So the sentence that says the wavelength of light is something, it was just garbled with a bunch of characters that had no meaning whatever. So, I knew how to correct it, but I am going to conclude with this. Let's see, I think I just have to go back here. I mentioned something about the student forums here. So here are the discussion forums. Okay, so now there are let's see, maybe I have to look at the side here. There are discussion forums, study groups. Study groups spontaneously formed. There's a Polish study group in Novosibirsk, UK, French, Portuguese, goes on and on, Australia. These are all spontaneously formed. There's a German study group. So I wrote a message to the German study group saying there's a problem in in the Wikimedia translation of Einstein's paper, maybe some of you people that speak German and have some good command of English would like to fix it. And within hours, that was done by some volunteer from the group. So that's a type of interaction that, you know, I would not get in an American classroom, and it, you know, it indicates that, you know, that you are dealing with some really highly motivated people who sort of like the idea that they're going to improve the English translation of the most accessible English translations of Einstein's paper. In fact, there were a couple of other not exactly errors in that translation, but, you know, bad choices of language or ineffective choices of language that I also pointed out to that group, and they fixed them. That's sort of a rewarding thing to be able to do, I think, both for me and for the people who actually did it. So I will conclude just by drawing your attention to Here is a comment that was made by one of the students. I asked them if I might use it in public presentations, giving them attribution. They agreed. And I'm not endorsing this as a statement of inarguable truth. It's one person's opinion, but it says things that make sense to me. This format is so superior to conventional on-campus live lecture format. I'm not going to say that that's my belief too, but here are the reasons. I download the lectures on my iPad, so that's the other advantage. You can just put these things on a tablet or a mobile device. Sit with my notebook and take notes just as I would in a classroom. I can pause the lecture to let my note-taking catch up, replay parts as needed, blah, blah. Work through the details of the derivation. It is so much more interactive than classroom. Now, this is a surprising statement, isn't it? Even the ability to post questions online is superior to in-classroom questions because I can pose a question based on thorough working through the lecture instead of from a place of having been lost due to my note-taking and comprehension not being able to keep up with the lecture. Then here's something about the socialization. I also started a meetup and now meet once a week with a fellow student. We have fantastic discussion of the lecture and related material. So, I mean, this is just, you know, the opinion of one individual, but it draws light on some of the differences in this model that are not so much due to the fact that it's available online. I mean, that's an important part of it, but it has a worldwide reach just because of its free and open nature. You know, if you had to pay $1 new Taiwan dollar to enroll in the course, there would be like 30 people enrolling rather than 30,000. $1 new Taiwan dollar is enough of a financial penalty that people won't pay it. How do I know? I mean, does Google charge a Taiwan dollar for a search? No, it wouldn't even think of doing that. Then no one would use Google. So these things together do show, I think, some of the richness of the medium. Certainly been rewarding to me, and I thank you for the chance to talk about it here in Taiwan. That's it.
Well, we still have time at least for 2 questions. And in the back?
Yes, I'd like to go back to the hype issue and get it from a standpoint of somebody who's actually taught a course. And I'm wondering how much of these numbers, this dramatic increase in participation in these kinds of courses that we've been seeing over the past several years, again, from the standpoint of somebody who's taught, how much of that can we attribute to people who are interested more in the process of this new medium, as opposed to somebody who is more interested in the actual topic that's being discussed? Have you gotten a sense of that in your own population of students?
Yeah, so the question, that's a good question, is, let me just paraphrase it, if I may. To what extent is the enthusiasm for this type of approach based on enthusiasm for the subject or enthusiasm for engagement in the medium? And do I have something to say about that from experience? So, I mean, I'd say certainly there is a significant fraction that is like, oh, the Rolling Stones are coming to town. We've got to go see the Stones. You know, there are people who just want to, if something new and people are talking about, they want to try it. I mean, universities have been offering distance learning for like 100 years. This Open University, very successful institution, has made a good living, you know, giving remote instruction. So people aren't excited about that. They're excited about the new buzz. The course, and actually the first Coursera course that I took, which was given by just unbelievably great instructor, a man called Nick Parlante, who is a Google engineer, introductory computer science. I took it because I wanted, well, actually, I've written tens of thousands of lines of code in my course, my professional life. I never had a course in computer science. I wanted to see if I could hack it in an introductory course in computer science at Stanford University and learn about the medium. Now, in our course, quantum physics, it required, you had to know how to do calculus in 3 dimensions in order to follow. So there was a necessary level of training and development was required to really derive anything useful from the course. I mean, you could look up that answer in Einstein's paper, but you wouldn't do well in everything else. So I think the people that we attracted, the ones who stayed, tended to be the ones that they had to be sufficiently interested in the subject itself that they were taking the course. And you know, we were offering what was nominally a course that has the same, you know, more comparable difficulty and similar material to what's offered at the first year of graduate instruction in quantum mechanics at the University of Maryland, which is a pretty well-known university in the United States, a major research university. So I think the students in my course were probably less fad-driven simply because of the difficulty of the material than might be the case in some of the introductory courses. But I'm sure that the novelty element does drive business in the door to some degree.
还有一个问题的空间。One last question. Okay.
How do you convince your colleague to join you to teach this online course? Or the other way, what's the most rewarding thing you got from teaching this course in the past few months?
The question is, how did I convince my colleagues that we should do this? And the answer is, I mostly didn't convince anybody. But it's like one of these things, something like this comes along. I mean, so what's the motivation for doing this? Well, to me, I mean, you know, I'm a physicist. I have a sort of a view of the world. I want to communicate it. I want it to be reviewed and analyzed by lots of people and get feedback. You know, I want to get a promotion. I want to get a pay rise. I want to publish more papers and all that other stuff. And so, to me, there's a potentially great value from having global exposure. That this, you know, that because of the fad element, this vehicle, you know, makes possible. So, in fact, most of my colleagues at the University of Maryland said it's going to be too difficult. It's going to take too much time. That was correct. But there was one other enthusiast, Dr. Galitsky. Oh, then there was a second enthusiast, the president of the University of Maryland, just reading these Tom Friedman columns in the New York Times, and he's saying, we can't get left behind. So he went out and negotiated a contract with Coursera, not telling anybody about it except his immediate subordinates. Then the word came out on the campus that there were going to be, the University of Maryland would choose 4 courses to send forward in the first round, and they welcomed proposals from all the faculty. So Victor and I had been talking about doing this already, so we had a pretty good idea. So like when the president of the university decided it was important, then the head of the physics department, who had previously said in these words, it's just bullshit, this MOOC, all of a sudden, when new facts came to his attention, he too changed his mind. And it became something that was not bullshit anymore. Or if it was bullshit endorsed by the president of the university, which is that's what we call fertilizer. It stimulates creativity. So, and to be serious, it did take much effort to You know, I give public talks frequently. That's rather different than giving, you know, let's say 2 hours per week. That's 120 minutes. You divide that by 10, let's say, for 10 minutes. That's 12 discrete chunks per week for 8 weeks. That's like 100, you know, sort of 100 episodes. It's like the Star Wars franchise. Now, they're short. You know, we weren't that worried about, you know, putting on makeup and sitting in a nice studio, but the actually putting together thematic stories of 10 minutes long and using them to, you know, create a narrative that lasts across weeks. I mean, that was real hard, and I didn't do as well at it as I hoped I might. So there is a. Oh, and also we had support from the university, which paid the salary for a teaching assistant, which was like unbelievably important to us. I mean, to have someone who would monitor who actually would take the recordings that we did and then edit them to get the length down and to take out the embarrassing pauses and all this other stuff. In fact, the advice they give you when recording these things, if you make a mistake, you know, you say something that's wrong when you're recording, just pause, you know, say something on the soundtrack saying, okay, I'm going to redo this, collect your thoughts and go on. So someone who knows the subject can edit that sort of material and shrink it down. It's a lot of work. So yeah, I mean, I'd say if you're thinking about doing it, and I gather there's a very serious effort here, having the sort of junior people who know the material and have good command of, you know, modern information technology to help with the production, I think is going to save you a lot of time and trouble. And if that's it, I'm going to.
Okay, we don't have enough time for any more questions. But if you have any question, you can discuss with Professor Pot and.
Sure.